quiet suburban home becomes the scene of a gruesome murder. Detectives are left without suspects or motive. Clues to solving it could be anywhere or nowhere. Investigators suspect that a woman's fatal fall was no accident. Now they must prove it step by step. When a murder exposes a family secret and a cast of shady characters, detectives don't know whom to believe. Killers have their own warped reasons for murder. Some kill for love, some seek vengeance, and others hope to line their pockets with blood money. In this case, the names of the victim and her family have been changed. On December 16, 1994, Len Gruber of Oklahoma City came home to spend his lunch hour with his wife, Carla. Christmas was less than 2 weeks away, and there was plenty to do. In an instant, the pleasant lunch he had planned turned into undiluted horror. Carla lay dead between the kitchen and the dining room. She was naked except for a single sock. A pair of pinking shears jutted from her chest.
Oklahoma City Police Department.
Yes, it's an emergency. My wife's been stabbed.
Police processed the scene. From the looks of it, the victim had fought mightily against her attacker. There was no evidence of sexual assault. Though signs of a struggle were found throughout the house, the epicenter seemed to be the kitchen. Drawers were upended, and the killer had apparently tried several weapons before choosing the pinking shears. The countertop bore a fresh knife strike. A broken knife and a bloodied barbecue fork lay on the floor. Detective Bob Bemo of the Oklahoma City Police Department didn't know what to make of such unbridled violence. But he knew where to start.
Both my partner and I realized that we had a heck of a situation, because this was what we could refer to as a whodunit homicide. Although we did immediately suspect the husband.
Len Gruber gave police a statement. Carla and Len were active in their church and married 30 years. Len told police that he had last seen his wife alive that morning. She had taken the day off to do some last-minute Christmas shopping.
Good morning, honey.
Len had planned to come home for lunch and help decorate and wrap gifts.
Yeah.
He left for the office as he normally did, and returned home a few hours later to find his wife dead. He didn't know who could have done this.
He answered all questions and was very deliberate in his answers and very cool and collected, which you consider highly unusual with a spouse after he's found his wife horribly murdered. I would have expected more emotion coming from him, or him to break down or to be crying. This is basically why he became a suspect.
But investigations are driven by facts, not feelings. Gruber's co-workers told police he had been at the office all morning. His wife's estimated time of death indicated that he couldn't have killed her before he left for work, and he passed a polygraph. Len Gruber was off the suspects list, and that meant there were no suspects. Because there were no signs of forced entry, police surmised that the killer might have been someone the victim had known.
Ask you a few questions.
Police brought Gruber in for questioning, hoping that he would provide them with some detail, some clue they may have overlooked that would reveal a possible suspect.
Like I said, I saw her.
Though he knew it was unlikely, Gruber provided the names of people in his prayer group.
Normal morning, I said goodbye at breakfast.
He couldn't think of anyone else his wife might have been in contact
For lunch,
with.
I was going to come home.
The victim kept an immaculate home, so fingerprints were few and far between. Those found at the point of entry belonged to the Grubers or their neighbors, except for a single thumbprint pulled from the storm door. Who it belonged to was anyone's guess. The forensic investigation continued. In the hallway between the bedroom and the kitchen, they examined the carpet and found faint blood stains. To make the blood easier to see, they used a chemical called luminol, which glows upon contact with blood. It revealed that the attack had proceeded from the bedroom door and down the hall. In one spot, the luminol disclosed boot prints. Detectives weren't sure if they were useful or not.
We're ready for you. Officer Jones, come, let's take a...
The star pattern resembled the tread on the boots that police officers wear. They feared the scene had been contaminated. Detective Bimo had to be sure before he discounted this potential clue.
I had quite a few of our officers at the scene stick their boots up so that we could photograph the bottoms of their boots in order to match it with this print. None of them matched.
The print provided one more piece of evidence against an unknown assailant. Investigators had collected utensils and blood samples from all over the house, hoping to find even more. According to forensic chemist Elaine Taylor, they had no way of telling what might be important.
A lot of times there's a lot of extraneous evidence that may be collected that as time goes by, you ultimately find out it had absolutely nothing to do with the crime scene, but it was collected anyway.
The house yielded a large amount of evidence. It would take days to sort it all out. Most compelling was a single drop of blood that didn't seem to belong to the victim. It was collected from a corner of the kitchen, far from where Carla Gruber had fought for her life.
My first impression was there was no way that the victim could ever have made it to that area where the blood on the chair was. I felt very confident of all the blood stains that were collected at the crime scene that was, in my opinion, going to be one of the most important.
Investigators needed to see if this blood matched the victim's blood. They used a process called electrophoresis to separate specific enzymes out of each sample. Certain enzymes vary from person to person. Electrophoresis utilizes an electric current to separate the enzymes for analysis. The sample is placed in a gel and a current is applied, causing the enzymes to move through the gel. Each enzyme moves a certain distinct distance, creating a pattern of bands. If two blood samples create the same pattern, it's probable they came from the same source. In this case, the bands from the victim's blood and the blood from the chair did not match. The blood was not the victim's. Blood samples from the Gruber's friends, relatives, and neighbors were also gathered for testing. No match there either. Investigators were confident that whoever shed this trap had killed the victim. But they still had no idea who that person was. As investigators collected clues to the murder of Carla Gruber, the victim's husband, Len, collected his thoughts.
I think they made the case.
According to Detective Bob Bemo, his recollection helped jog the investigation.
He had remembered a subject by the name of Eric Patton who had worked for him and had done some painting to his residence during the summer months of June and July.
Len had met Patton at the telemarketing firm where he worked. The Grubers knew he had a prison record, but they weren't interested in that. They believed he deserved another chance. They hadn't seen him since he'd finished painting 6 months earlier.
Somebody else that was there yesterday, but it wasn't me.
Patton was called in for questioning.
Night of the crime here at home.
He told police that he had served time in California for minor burglary. He confirmed that he hadn't been to the Grubers' house since the summer. After he left the station, detectives did some checking on him. They learned that he had asked to have his parole moved to Oklahoma so he could be with his family and girlfriend. Detective Bemo contacted his parole officer to check his story.
And I found that he had been involved in several armed robberies where he used a knife and a pair of scissors. The scissors were quick to catch my eye, and my partner and I both felt like that we had something here.
On December 22nd, 6 days after the murder, Carla Gruber was laid to rest. Investigators used the opportunity to look for potential suspects by photographing those attending.
The main reason that you photograph these individuals is to find out if somebody who's been named is there, also somebody that hasn't been named shows up, and you want to know who they are. You never know. It's unusual, but in some cases the suspect has been known to attend the funeral.
This was one of those cases. The suspect, Eric Patton, was there. Len Gruber identified him from photographs taken at the funeral. Because he barely knew the victim, his attendance raised suspicions, but provided no real evidence of guilt. The best proof would likely come from the physical evidence. The Oklahoma City Police Forensics Lab sorted out the items collected from the crime scene. Attention focused on a bloody barbecue fork retrieved from the kitchen. Investigators wondered if the killer's prints were engraved in Carla Gruber's blood. After photographing the fork to document it, technicians shined an alternate light source over it. Prints too faint to be seen in ordinary light can often be revealed through light of a different wavelength. None turned up, but that didn't mean none were there. The next step was treatment with a chemical called diamidobenzidine. It reacts with blood proteins, clinging to them and turning them brownish red. The chemical was applied and then developed, revealing a single, clear print. It matched the print from Eric Patton's previous arrest report. So did the print on the Gruber's storm door.
Who was that?
You Eric Patton?
Yes, sir.
I have a warrant for your arrest. Right here.
Warrant for my arrest for what? I didn't do
Police
anything.
made their arrest.
We're going to take you downtown.
Boots were found that matched the tread pattern photographed at the crime scene. They too belonged to Patton. 2 weeks later, DNA tests proved the blood drop on the kitchen chair was his. That was all they needed.
The significance of the blood at the scene being foreign to the victim, but consistent with the suspect, Mr. Patton, tied him to the crime scene.
The morning that I actually arrived,
Faced with the overwhelming evidence, Eric Patton confessed. He told authorities that he needed money for drugs. He thought he'd find some at the Gruber's house, not expecting anyone to be there. When he saw that Carla Gruber was home, he modified his plan. She invited him in.
Serious problem. I need to borrow some money.
When he asked for money, she went to find some, though she told him she didn't keep any in the house. But Patton was desperate, and he committed a desperate act. Because of the heinous nature of his crime, Eric Patton received the death penalty. Things often aren't as they first appear. A killer could visit in the guise of a friendly acquaintance, and an accident could turn out to be no accident. On June 7, 1988, paramedics in Tyler, Texas, were called to the home of 66-year-old Betty Lucas. Her son Stephen reported that she had fallen down the stairs while he was visiting. She had critical head injuries, and her vital signs grew weak. Paramedics stabilized her for transport to the hospital.
Doc, what's the doc?
There, Betty Lucas's condition continued to worsen. The following day, Stephen Lucas made the difficult decision to have his mother taken off life support.
She's in a deep coma.
Within a few hours,
If
Betty
I've been around
Lucas
that life
was dead.
support, I'm asking you, is she gonna come out of this?
I don't know, Mr. Lucas.
2 days later, the Tyler Police Department received an anonymous call advising them to investigate her death. What looked like an accident, the caller said, might really be a murder. The caller suggested looking more closely at Stephen Lucas. The tip was forwarded to Detective Danny Alexander. Not certain what to make of the information, he began looking into the facts of Betty Lucas's death. He knew that the victim had been well known and well liked.
Betty Lucas was a very wealthy, influential person in this community. Her husband had been the mayor of the city of Tyler at one time. He owned a business here in Tyler, a real estate business that was very successful prior to his death.
The allegation that Betty's son intentionally murdered her seemed preposterous. But police were obliged to follow the lead. The investigation started at the hospital. The treating physician told police that Betty Lucas had died from irreparable brain damage. Her wounds were confined to her head. They seemed inconsistent with the type of fall her son described. Investigators now had to wonder if there was some truth to the anonymous tip. But investigators had lost valuable time. According to Texas law, authorities must be notified about any unnatural death that occurs within 24 hours of admission to a hospital. Betty Lucas's death fell into this category, but her doctor had been unaware of the rule and had released her for burial.
At that point, we were behind in the game. Evidence had been possibly lost or was no longer available to us. And the fact was that within a couple hours of our notification, she was to be buried.
By the time police began their investigation, her body was already gone. Alexander learned from the doctor that Stephen Lucas had acted strangely while his mother was in the hospital.
Some information
He had been unwilling to provide details about the accident and demanded that she be buried as soon as possible once she was declared dead.
Stephen had not notified Betty's family in South Carolina of her being admitted to the hospital, nor did he notify them that she had died and was buried.
It was time to talk to Stephen Lucas. Investigators met him and his daughter Stephanie at the victim's home to hear their account of the accident. Stephen told them that he and Stephanie had stopped over around dinner time to return Betty's VCR. He said that Betty was angry with him because he didn't want to attend an upcoming charity event. She then accused him of breaking her VCR and demanded it back.
Mom, give me the VCR back. I only borrowed it
Stephen
for one
didn't want her
day.
to carry the heavy machine herself, but she refused his help. After a tug of war at the top of the stairs, she jerked it up and over her shoulder. The next thing Stephen knew, his mother had fallen over the banister and tumbled down the steps.
Are you okay?
Steve indicated that when she hit the staircase that she then began to slide down the staircase, her head bouncing on each step as she went down. And that when she had reached the bottom of the staircase, she was in the foyer area, that she sat up briefly and then fell back, hitting her head one last time on the last stair of the staircase.
Stephen said that he immediately ran to the bottom of the stairs and moved his mother's head from the bottom step to the marble floor.
Go get help, Steph.
He then sent Stephanie to get help from a neighbor while he called an ambulance. Stephanie said she saw her father and grandmother fighting, but because they always squabbled, she wasn't alarmed. The detective didn't get much more information out of the young woman.
When you ask her about any questions and tried to pin her down into a specific story, she would be very evasive and finally would say, "I'm not sure."
The next thing I knew,
Stephen was asked to walk through the scene and recreate what had happened. When he and Stephanie were asked separately where Betty was standing before the fall, they identified locations at least 20 feet apart. Police found no evidence of a struggle at either point. There was another puzzling detail. A neighbor told police that Stephen Lucas and his daughter Stephanie didn't accompany Betty to the hospital immediately after the accident. Instead, they had stayed behind to clean the blood off the floor. Not only was it odd behavior for worried family members, it eliminated a vital source of evidence. After questioning the witnesses and examining the scene, police still had no clear idea how the victim fell. They had no way of corroborating the Lucas's vague stories or any way of proving that they were lying. A lot of unanswered questions were buried along with Betty Lucas. With every passing day, the body of Betty Lucas would have less and less information to divulge. If police were going to get to the bottom of this case, they'd need to get to the bottom of her grave. Investigators hoped that an examination of the victim's remains would clear up some of the discrepancies between Lucas's account and the suspicions that swirled around him. A week after her death, a court ordered Betty Lucas exhumed for autopsy. The autopsy began with a visual inspection. In serious falls, one normally sees large contusions, scraped skin, and most notably, broken bones, especially in a 66-year-old woman. But X-rays turned up no broken bones or dislocated joints. Pathologist Virgil Gonzalez could find no indication of a fall.
And if she hit the stair, there will be a grazing type of abrasion on the skin because of the carpet, a burned skin. But there's no scraping or a grazing type of injuries in any part of Mrs. Lucas' body. The injuries were all confined to the head and the scalp.
Gonzalez discovered a major discrepancy in Stephen Lucas's account. Shaving revealed 7 clean-cut lacerations on the top of her head. If, as Stephen said, she'd received her wounds by sliding down the stairs, only the back of her head would have been injured. From these 7 lacerations, Gonzalez could draw only one conclusion.
Betty Lucas is not an accidental death. It's a homicide.
No matching weapon was found, but investigators were certain that Betty Lucas's wounds could not have come from a fall. After the autopsy, police spoke with Stephanie a second time. Her comments made it clear that she didn't see the fatal fall and wasn't directly involved. Based on the autopsy findings and the family's inconsistent stories, the police classified Betty Lucas's death a homicide, and Stephen Lucas was their main suspect. Investigators returned to the home of Betty Lucas to build their case.
Good shots in this area.
They didn't have a lot to go on. There were no signs of damage on or near the second floor banister, where the struggle had supposedly occurred.
Try to get as many as you can.
Investigators could find no clues to trace the victim's trajectory down the stairs. No evidence was found at the top of the stairs, but the staircase was hardly pristine. Midway up the stairs, investigators found gouges, dents, and scrapes to the wall and molding. A painting was pulled away from the wall, as if someone had clung to it for balance. Sharp cuts marked the banister.
Here, if you would, go ahead.
The victim's maid confirmed that the damage was fresh.
You would take a couple more.
Blood was found on the balusters at the base of the stairs. Investigators had found a spot that Stephen and Stephanie's cleaning had missed.
In that area, we also found very small amounts of blood, which would indicate to us that at some point Betty Lucas's head had rested on that step, or something had happened to get blood in that area.
As the investigation progressed, police searched for motive. Investigators learned that Stephen and Betty's relationship had soured after Stephen failed to repay her a $350,000 loan. Things had recently gone from bad to worse when she refused to give him another $50,000. With Betty dead, Stephen's debt would be relieved, and he stood to inherit even more money from her estate.
She controlled the money in the family, and he was in financial trouble and needed that money, and a lot of arguments, especially right before her death, centered around him wanting to borrow money, get more money from her.
On November 10th, 1988, armed with a motive and forensics that seemed to disprove Stephen Lucas's account, police arrested him. Lucas stood trial in May, but after 6 weeks in court and 22 hours of deliberation, it ended in a hung jury. When polled, the jurors said they weren't convinced by the forensics. The investigators had to start over. The first trial of Stephen Lucas ended in a hung jury. The weight of the evidence had failed to tip the scales toward either accident or murder. If the prosecution had any hope of convicting Stephen Lucas in the murder of his mother, Betty, they needed to strengthen and clarify their forensics case. the state hired Alan Weckerling, a specialist in accident reconstruction, to review the evidence. By now, years had passed since Betty Lucas's death. Her home had been sold and the staircase repaired. But a few items from the crime scene had been saved.
The evidence we were interested in looking at was the molding on the stairwell and the railing on the stairwell, to see if the VCR had actually flown down the stairwell and hit the railing and then ricocheted off of the wall.
Weckerling began by testing Stephen's assertion that his mother had fallen from the head of the stairs. A series of deep gouges marked the top of the wooden molding. Weckerling had to confirm that these were caused by the tumbling VCR. The molding and VCR were examined under a microscope. Paint marks on the VCR matched the molding, proving that it was the source of the damage. But as he studied the molding, Weckerling made a crucial discovery.
I was able to look at the wood under the microscope, and based on really some very simple scientific principles of when you're roller painting a wall and you get the little drips of paint, gravity is going to pull those down.
The paint drips proved that until now the molding had been analyzed upside down. The damage was actually on its underside and could not have come from a falling VCR, as Stephen had asserted. These cuts were made with an intentional upward stroke, damaging the molding from below and undermining Stephen's story about his mother's accidental fall. The next step was to refute the defense assertion that Betty Lucas could have tumbled over the banister and down the stairs. The defense in the first trial used a series of complex calculations to create a computer animation similar to this one, demonstrating Stephen's account of his mother's fall. The prosecution hired physicist Mike Andrews to take a closer look at the animation and defense calculations. He found that the trajectory they presented was physically impossible.
What you should see is that she would just start going over the rail and just go down and land below. What we found was that the initial step, she would go through the banister instead of over the top of it. Then she would come back through, and then she would do a little loop, and then she would go back through it again and then fall down below.
Andrews had the house measured again and used these measurements to disprove the defense scenario. Betty Lucas could not have fallen from the top of the staircase, as her son Stephen had said. Police surmised that Betty Lucas had an argument with her son midway up the stairs. They struggled, creating the damage to the molding and the staircase. Betty fell, and Stephen Lucas beat her near death with an unknown weapon. Lucas stood trial again. This time, the forensic evidence proved that Betty Lucas could not have fallen accidentally. Impeccable detective work had kept a wily killer from getting away with a nearly perfect murder.
There was no eyewitnesses, only the suspect and the victim. Had it not been for the evidence uncovered by the use of forensic science, Steve would have walked away.
Stephen Lucas's plan was complete when he authorized the hospital to take his mother off life support. Stephen was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 35 years. Stephen Lucas tried to get away with murder by making his mother's death look like an accident. Others aren't so thorough in hiding their crime. In this case, the names of the victim and her family have been changed. In the early morning hours of February 19, 1988, a motorist in Lincoln, Nebraska, came across what looked like a one-car accident. Inside, the victim, a woman, was dead, apparently from a head injury. Lancaster County Sheriff's Department, along with the coroner's office, arrived on the scene. They could tell the situation wasn't as it appeared to be. Though the victim had suffered severe injuries, damage to the car was minimal. There were no skid marks. The gear was in park. The car keys were missing, and so was the victim's ID. And the driver's side door had a fresh puncture mark. The scene bore every indication that this was no accident. Sergeant Larry Russell led the investigation.
The injuries were not that type of an injury that would be in comparison to a traffic fatality that you would normally see, the trauma. In looking at the individual closer, it was actually found to be bullet holes, that some sort of projectile that had gone into the head area.
The search of the area surrounding the crime scene found no gun or other apparent clues. In fact, all that was found was a pack of cigarettes, torn open from the bottom, and 2 pairs of house slippers, a men's pair and a women's pair. They were collected, though they didn't seem relevant. Based on the vehicle registration, the Sheriff's Department tentatively identified the victim as Jane Liry, age 25. Her ID was confirmed at autopsy, where her fingerprints were taken and checked against police records. She had a prior record from another state. The autopsy also confirmed that she was killed by 2 gunshot wounds to the head. She had no other injuries.
Here's some coffee.
Investigators contacted the victim's husband. He was brought in for questioning.
Talk to you about last night. Now, you state
Jack
you didn't
Liry
know
didn't
your
seem
wife was
terribly
at the house?
surprised by the news.
No. Last night with your wife.
Police asked him to recount the events of the day before.
You didn't know she was gone? Why don't you ever clean up around here?
Liry told police that he and Jane had been fighting.
If you're the breadwinner, why don't you
Nothing
get out?
serious, just a typical domestic quarrel.
Oh, you want me to leave you alone? Why don't you get out?
I'll get out.
As usual, Jane took the kids to her mother's and then went off. He really didn't worry about her. A few hours later, 2 acquaintances of the victim showed up at the Liry home. Herman Buckman and his girlfriend, Goldie Fisher.
Jack, I don't believe you.
Leary admitted to
We had a
police
big
that
fight.
Jane sold drugs. He
We had
said
a
that
big
Buckman
fight.
and Fisher came there to trade a
And she
handgun
walked out
for
with the
some.
kids.
When he
And
told
then,
the couple that his wife wasn't home,
couple
they left to
friends
go
of mine
find
came
her.
over.
Leary suspected they murdered his wife.
With your wife.
That wasn't how it sounded to Detective
Got a
Russell.
middle knife for no apparent reason.
My first initial impression is that the husband definitely knew more than he was telling. It just didn't seem likely that, gosh, you arrive at a individual's house and you say, hey, your wife has just been shot. And the guy comes up with, well, oh yeah, there were some people here the night before and they were wanting to sell a gun for drugs, and it just didn't seem real believable initially, primarily because of his demeanor.
While Jack Liry was giving his statement, his wife's car was being scoured for clues. Investigators found little more than cigarette butts. They managed to lift some latent prints, but the ones that could be read matched only the victim. Cigarette butts in the car were sent to the lab for analysis to see if they might reveal some clue. A test called immunoglobulin allotyping was performed on the traces of saliva on the filter. The test analyzes the presence of specific proteins found in body fluids. These proteins are genetic markers that vary to a certain degree from individual to individual. According to serologist Rena Roy, formerly of the Nebraska State Patrol Laboratory, the results weeded out most of the population, but indicated that whoever smoked the cigarettes was most likely African American.
95% of the African American population was excluded as being the donor of the saliva on the cigarette butt, as well as 99.3% of the Caucasian population.
The results suggested that the victim, a Caucasian, wasn't the one who smoked the cigarettes found at the scene. The murderer possibly had. Police were now looking for an African-American suspect. Jack Liry was off the suspects list. With no other leads, detectives had to follow Jack Liry's improbable story. They ran a check on Herman Buckman and Goldie Fisher. Both had prior records for narcotics, burglary, and assault. They called Buckman in for an interview. He wasn't the most cooperative of subjects. He said he didn't need an attorney.
When Herman came into the room, I initially read him his rights. He pretty much told me to go pound sand. I'm not going to tell you anything. I wasn't there. A few other words were said, and he then asked for a cigarette.
Buckman refused the deputy's cigarette and said he only smoked a certain brand.
Mr. Buckman, we'd like to ask you some questions, as you may be aware. Understand?
A pack was brought to him. He opened it from the bottom. It was a habit he picked up in prison to keep the filters clean.
You know, it's like a light bulb came on. I've seen this cigarette pack before somewhere, and then, of course, at the crime scene, there was a cigarette pack with the same type of tear.
Yes, questions.
The interview concluded, and Buckman left, and left behind 2 cigarette butts. They were collected and sent to the lab to see if the saliva from the filters matched the saliva from the ones collected from the murder scene. The same immunoglobulin allotype test was performed on these filters. Then the results were compared. The genetic markers on the filters from the car and from the ones Buckman left at the station matched closely.
Looking at the results, we could conclude that Mr. Buckman could have been the donor of the saliva on this cigarette butt.
The characteristics of the saliva were common to 5% of the African American population. The margin of error was too wide. Also, the cigarette only proved that the smoker had recently been in the victim's car. It didn't prove he was the killer.
Mary and Herman.
The cigarette butts could have been in the car for weeks. Investigators reviewed everything they had on Buckman, trying to find holes in his story.
Right here.
He had told detectives that he spent the whole night with his girlfriend, Goldie Fisher. In her interview, Goldie Fisher told police that on the night of the murder, she was out with friends and went to see her mother.
When's the last time you saw her?
She confirmed that Herman Buckman was with her the whole time. To check her alibi, investigators paid a visit to Goldie Fisher's mother.
A few questions we'd like to ask you.
She didn't know about the crime or that her daughter might be under suspicion.
We just have some questions about your daughter. Goldie Fisher.
She told police that Goldie hadn't been to see her in at least 4 days. But Jane Leary's murder occurred only 1 day earlier.
Well, thank you for having us in your home.
Goldie's alibi was starting to tarnish. In Lincoln, Nebraska, the investigation into the murder of Jane Liry led detectives to the bar that suspects Herman Buckman and Goldie Fisher frequented.
Yeah, the odd thing about it was you wouldn't know.
Some patrons said they saw the couple there on the night of the murder. Buckman had a gun with him.
You know, is there anything unusual?
Detective Russell learned something else about the pair as well.
One of the things that Herman Buckman and Goldie Fisher did is they would dress rather nicely going out for the evening, but they had a very unusual thing. They both wore house slippers, which isn't common in my estimations to go out in house slippers.
The slippers found at the crime scene, once thought to be insignificant, now were more closely analyzed. Droplets of blood were found on them. The blood matched the victims. That linked the slippers to the victim, but not necessarily to the suspects. Investigators needed something more solid. As news of the crime spread, a potential witness surfaced. She realized she'd been near the murder scene shortly after the crime occurred. She'd picked up a hitchhiker. It was around 2 a.m. on the day of the murder. The woman she picked up was acting very strangely. She had no shoes on and seemed to be in a hurry. The driver dropped her off at a nearby neighborhood, Goldie Fisher's neighborhood. The witness picked out Fisher's picture from a photo lineup. That placed Fisher at the crime scene, where she had also apparently lost her slippers and her alibi. Investigators now had enough to arrest Fisher and Buckman for suspicion of murder. With both of their suspects in custody, it was a matter of securing the case against them. Investigators set out to find evidence that placed Fisher and Buckman at the scene. When Buckman's car was searched, ski masks, a crowbar, and other burglary tools were found in the trunk, but nothing that matched the murder weapon. A search warrant also allowed investigators to collect the clothes the victim's husband described the couple as wearing the night of the murder. Traces of blood were found on the lining of Buckman's jacket and on his sweater. It was the victim's blood. With all the pieces in place, investigators were able to surmise the events leading up to the death of Jane Liry. Buckman and Fisher knew where Jane usually sold her drugs. They caught up with her, hoping to trade their gun for some dope. When she refused, they killed her for her drugs and whatever cash she had. Then they pushed the car into the ditch. In addition to receiving 20 to 60 years for firearm possession, Herman Buckman was sentenced to life. Goldie Fisher, charged with robbery and accessory to murder, received 15 to 30 years. Homicide is the ultimate selfish act. Solving it is just the opposite. Only through the close interaction of scientists and investigators can murderers be caught and justice served.